Today we are asking legendary coach and U.S. history teacher Eddie Gray about growing up during integration.
Let's say I'm a 1970 graduate of Garner Senior High School. I attended this school in 1968 when it first opened. Went on to North Carolina State University, graduated in 1974. Went back and got my teacher's certificate 1976 after a little stint in graduate school. Walked in these doors in 1977, and for the last 36 years I've been a social studies teacher and coach here at Garner Senior High School.
So growing up, when did you recognize that there were different races, different skin colors?
Well, I had a kind of an unusual childhood because my mother was born in Madrid, Spain, and my grandmother was part of a royal family in Spain, and they had to flee Franco and the fascist civil war in Spain. They fled, and my grandmother had a great influence on me when I was growing up. Of course, I grew up in the Garner area, Raleigh, North Carolina, and I can remember watching the Ku Klux Klan march down Fayetteville Street. I can remember going to bus stops with my grandmother and going on bus trips and seeing a colored waiting room and white waiting room, and bathrooms were labeled, water fountains were labeled. I always tell the story that I used to go to Hudson Belt, which is on downtown Fayetteville Street, and I drank out of the colored water fountain one time as a little boy, because I thought it might be flavored. But my grandmother didn't stop me from drinking out of the water fountain. And I just learned a lot about treating people as you want to be treated from my grandmother when I was growing up. But a lot of the people that I grew up with, they didn't have the same kind of childhood. So I'm really grateful for what my grandmother taught me about judging people on their character and what they do rather than on their skin tone.
Did you attend any segregated schools?
Well, yes. I had kind of an unusual childhood there too. I actually went to a Catholic school, even though I was Southern Baptist. I went to a Catholic school in the first grade because my grandmother lived down the street from the school, and I could go to school and then go stay with my grandmother while my mother worked, and that was my daycare. And I went to school with a lot of different people in the first grade from different backgrounds. And in second grade, I went to Ravenscroft, which was actually in downtown Raleigh near a Presbyterian church. But I could actually tell at that early age that there was a kind of a socio-economic difference between the kids I went to school with at Ravenscroft and my own condition. But went to my first public school at Bandor Springs Elementary School, which was built for a white subdivision in Garner, which was called Forest Hills, which is not too far from this school. And for most of my early schooling, I didn't go to school with people of color, or most of the people I went to school with had the same religious and socioeconomic backgrounds that I had until my junior year, and that's when we had integration.
How did any national sports figures like Jackie Robinson or Hank Aaron or Muhammad Ali, how did they change your impressions about integration?
Well, that's another thing. As a history teacher, I was taught that everything that was successful in life and every great thing that was ever done in the world was done by white males. And then later on, when I became a U.S. history teacher and I could read things for myself, I really made it a concerted effort when I first started teaching to teach my students what I thought was a more truthful version of U.S. history. I remember in 1977, I was the first social studies teacher at Garner to use the TV miniseries called Roots in my classes. Since that time I've tried to teach young people what I really believe is the true history of our country. But I really didn't get that aspect until I became an adult.
Can you recall when you first heard about the death of Dr. King?
Oh, sure I can. I remember I was in a school play, and this was before integration. I was a sophomore, and had this great drama teacher that got me involved in drama. I'd always done athletics, but I never did that. But I thought this was another way for somebody to clap for me. I liked it. So I was in this play called Little Abner, and I was supposed to go to play rehearsal at what is today North Garner Middle School, which was at that time the predominantly white high school in Garner. And I'd heard about Dr. King's murder, and Mama wasn't going to let me go to play rehearsal, but I had a car back then, so I went. But I remember driving to the school, and you could see a light in the sky in southeast Raleigh, and there had been a riot that day, and there had been some violence. Not anything like we had in some other major cities, but I can recall that quite vividly. That there was a lot of unrest, and at that time in history, there was a lot of young people that were kind of confused. You had the war in Vietnam, you had the Kennedy assassination, just one of those mixed up years in the history of our country, 1968.
Coach Gray, could you tell us what you think are some of the greatest accomplishments of the Civil Rights era?
Well, I can remember as a young boy watching, because I grew up with most of the baby boomers. We loved television, so I can remember watching Dr. King's speech on television in Washington, the now famous "I Have a Dream" speech, and just really sort of taking into words, and it all sort of made sense to me that people ought to be judged by what they do in life rather than what they look like, and that had a great impact on my thinking. And of course, as I mentioned before, my grandmother tried to instill those kinds of values in me. But I always had the opinion that if one group of people were treated differently, then we were all treated differently, and that if you promote civil rights, you promote it for all. And it was really a great time to grow up, even though there was a lot of unrest in our country. I think we really came to grips with the words of our founding documents that all men are created equal during that time period. And we still have a problem understanding what those words mean. And that's one of the importance of U.S. history, and that's one of the vital lessons that the next generation needs to be taught, and that it needs to be carried on to the next generation, because there's only one generation from not remembering our history. It was a great time to grow up, but I was fortunate to have adults in my life that tried to teach those kinds of values to me, and I've tried to teach it to the kids that I've had the opportunity to have in class.
Thank you for your time, Coach Gray.
No problem, my brother.
Have a good afternoon.